What is up, fight fans? It is 2 p.m. in the Mile High, so you know what that means. It is time for the MMA plug presented to you by Mile High Sports. We're coming to you from the Mile High Sports studio at the number 38, presented by Volo and the Vimos app. Guys, there is no shortage of events that are going on in the sports world over the course of the next few weeks, whether it be March Madness coming up, you have the Super Bowl this Sunday, winter sports going into all-star breaks with the NBA and the NHL. There is so many things for you to come and check out on all of these viewing screens here at the number 38. Check out the menu of a lot of great eats on the board. You've also got plenty of barley pops on tap. Great sports bar viewing atmosphere down here at the number 38. You could pick up that Mile High Sports merch on the way in. That is available on demand. And you can check out Volo for any of those adult recreation needs. Going to be a lot of opportunities for that coming up as the weather is starting to change and get a little bit warmer here as we are now into February. Man, got my man Danny Bailey behind the boards here. It's crazy, dude. How are we already in February?
Yeah, time flies. I can't believe that the football season's almost over.
Just still crushes me that the Broncos are no longer in the mix. But as Danny mentioned, this weekend there is a Super Bowl going down. Not going to talk too much about it because I'm still butthurt about the way that the AFC Championship went. But if you guys have any thoughts on which way the game is going to go, I would definitely love to at least hear your thoughts and opinions on it out there in the process. We have the Avalanche, who have had a bit of a rough patch over the last 10 games, but they still have the best record in the NHL right now. Obviously, that pace that they started with, it's pretty hard to maintain over the course of an 82-game season. But still, if you give yourself enough cushion, well, when you have these little stub your toe type of moments, you're able to absorb that cushion a little bit in the process. You have the Nuggets, who are moving steadily along right now, even despite dealing with some of those major injuries across the hierarchy of their roster out there. But you can check out all of the rest of that sports coverage for the Core Four through the Mile High Sports crew. They're doing tremendous things out there. You know, it's a great deal of content from the social media side to the magazines, the website, the podcast side, the YouTube channel. Or again, come down, show your support by picking up some of the merch out of the vending machine that we have there with a bunch of different t-shirt designs available. Smash that like, share, and subscribe button wherever it is possible. Giving you a little bit of the rundown right now as far as some of the upcoming events. We're just going to do the next this weekend, essentially, where we have a double event going on Saturday as well as Sunday. You have CJJC, the Grapple Bowl card that is going down at the Stampede. Going to give you some more information on that here in just a little bit on in the program, as well as Colorado Combat Club 28 going down at the Stampede also. These are both going to be daytime shows, cracking doors at 12. We're going to have you out of there by the time that the Super Bowl starts on Sunday. So please, if you have the chance, come out and support your local combat sports events. If you don't have the chance to come and see it in person, pick up the stream. That definitely helps us as well, showing your support from afar. So we're grateful for all of the likes, shares, the follows, everything in the process. But also, we would love to see you there in person, or we would love for you to be able to pick up that stream and watch us out there as we have our shows going down at the Stampede this weekend. More on those later. Running into a quick bit of the weekend recap, I want to give a shout out to Alexis Apodaca for picking up a win over there in Peak. You know, I love watching Alexis fight. She's a fun prospect in the women's division to check out. She fights like a complete psychopath. Her head is on fire every single time that she fights. And she goes out there and scraps down. I mean, you want to talk about somebody who just bites down on the mouthpiece and swings forward? That's Alexis. So congratulations to you picking up that victory over there on Peak through the weekend. In the Dirty Boxing Championships, you had the High Chief Zach Paunga winning by TKO victory. The injury to Cleveland was definitely unfortunate. You never want to see anybody not be able to compete due to injury or something of that sort. However, that wasn't going to change what the result was. Zach Paunga looked arguably the greatest on the feet that we've seen him throughout his entire fight career. We've always known that, yes, he's an athlete. I mean, he has the resume, the accolades, the pedigree, the background, so on and so forth to be able to support that, being that he was a two-sport professional athlete, stint of time in the NFL. The last time that he said he was down in Houston was when he was still with the Texans. For reference, that's where that dirty boxing card was this last weekend. He was also a pro rugby player. So a pro in two different sports prior to becoming a professional fighter. In a short amount of time, rose through the local and regional scene, got to the Ultimate Fighter, spent his time in the UFC, and has now fought across a couple of different fight promotions, whether it was his debut with Dirty Boxing, going through the heavyweight tournament in Karate Combat, knocking out notable names like Alan Belcher in the process, to now returning back to the Dirty Boxing ring and looking phenomenal the other night. I hope that they bring him back. There's obviously some moving parts with their heavyweight division right now, and they had initially in Dirty Boxing put a lot of stock into Jairzinho Rosenstrike. What's the story going to be with him with the latest arrest? Is he going to be deported? Is he going to be able to come back to the States and work, especially with one of his charges? I believe it was an false impersonation or something along those lines, sort of charges. So, yeah, I don't know what the degree of severity is in relation to work visas and all that sort of legalities go. I'm not sure how that works out for them. But that could also mean for some of these other guys that the heavyweight division is wide open for Dirty Boxing. Dirty Boxing was our show of the year outside of, or our non-MMA combat sports promotion of the year last year, I should say. I think that there's nothing but bigger, brighter things that's going to come for that brand. And they had a phenomenal show the other night. And you could check those out still on YouTube. I'm sure it's only a matter of time before they're behind a paywall of some sort. But again, for some of these, appreciate it while you have it for free. Then moving along to the UFC 325 went on down under. That was a card that, we're going to talk some more about Volk later on in the program. However, Alexander Volkanovski, I feel like in this particular scenario, it's really unfortunate that we aren't necessarily seeing him fight all of the absolute best of the best right now. And it's not to try to take anything away from Diego, because in Diego's defense, as he said last week during a lot of the questions that were questioning whether or not he should actually be in this title fight position, he said, hey, all I do is say yes to the fights that are offered to me. I can't blame Diego for having that position. I also can't blame Volk for saying, hey, this is the name that they put on a contract in front of me. I said yes. I've not told the UFC no at this point, and I'm not going to. He did say that hopefully now in this next title defense opportunity, it goes back to a merit-based system. So that would potentially be Lerone or Movsar Avoyev. There's also rumors that those two are set to fight, or they're looking to book that matchup between those two guys, essentially as a title eliminator. It's just kind of unfortunate that we did not see Volk fight one of those two guys right now based on the merits. Again, Volk's last fight was last year down in Miami, last spring against Diego. And his next fight right here was against Diego. Diego had one fight in between against a guy who was not ranked in the top 10 in Gene Silva at Noche UFC back in September. There's absolutely the argument to be made of what was the true merits of Diego's deserving of the title shot. Aside from him being entertaining, he absolutely has an entertaining fight style. He's a massive star in his native Brazil, as well as a mega star in Mexico. He's got quite the fellowship here in America. I mean, his fan base is by himself exponentially larger than both Lerone and Movsar combined. And as mentioned on a multitude of occasions, the Paramount Plus era is aiming for entertainment-based matchups. So, from the entertainment business side of things that just so happens to encapsulate the sport of MMA, yes, that was the reason and why Diego got that shot. However, Alexander Volkanovski showed why there are levels to the game the other night. He showed just why he is presenting his case to be one of the all-time greats of the sport, not just of the division. Alexander Volkanovski went out there and proved that you might have had a couple of moments against me the first time, but young man, unless you went to the drawing board and made some serious adjustments to your style, your attacks, your tactics, your approach, your game plan, it's going to be a hard night now that you gave me 25 minutes of intel to work with in the first place. And I think that it is absolutely fair that the scorecard of that fight was 49-46. One card had it 50-45. All 5 rounds to Volk. I'll concede Diego having a round. What I won't say is that there was really ever a moment where I felt Diego had a chance, where I felt Diego had Volk really truly compromised to the point to where there was a potential route to finish. Did he have a couple of scoring sequences? Sure. I'm not going to sit here and say that he got Moutinho'd or anything to that effect. However, I do not think that there was ever really a moment where he had an absolute, yes, this was it, and I just missed. This was the chance where I could have gone for the victory. This was the chance where a zig versus a zag was the difference of me getting my hand raised and 12 pounds of gold around my waist. Whereas there was a couple of those sequences where Volk was just off from finding the finishing shot of Diego Lopez. Every fight going forward for Volk, now sitting at 37 years old as a champion at 145 pounds, he is defying every bit of conventional wisdom when it comes to what the stats say for somebody of that age in those divisions. He is the norm breaker. He is the one who has gone against the grain and has defied every bit of statistical analysis for those measures. So yeah, going forward, every fight is always going to be a major risk for him, questioning, okay, well, somebody who has the explosive pop and power like Diego did, how is the chin going to hold up? Well, we saw that it did pretty well the other night, and Volk's ability to work angles, to stay off the center line, to avoid some of the linear blitzes from Diego, man, that is why he is one of the greats to ever do it. But again, the question circles back to the original. What does that win do for his legacy? Think it adds another fun, entertaining fight. But does it cross off that absolutely every last person that he fought was that next top guy? I don't know. I think that that's something that more of what time will tell. I personally can understand why Diego got the shot. I'm not saying that I agree with it, but I do understand, as I've said many a times on the program, 2 people know who Lerone is. 1 person knows who Movsar is. That's the problem. Diego was the next most known. Aside from then, there's Yair that's sitting out there, and we've already seen how Volk decimated him. The featherweight division, I think, has been heralded by 3 crazy greats. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the program. Moving along to the co-main event, what a fight IQ mistake. I think that Dan Hooker, certainly when we're talking about did somebody have moments or did they have opportunities and a route to victory? Absolutely. Especially with the body shots, Dan Hooker was starting to put Benoit Saint-Denis in trouble. Benoit Saint-Denis' posture, his body language, his temperament changed after Hooker started to find a couple of shots. However, when he tried to go for the takedown and ends up missing on his throw attempt, ends up on bottom and in an absolutely terrible position. Like, you lost yourself that fight by making a 5-second poor IQ decision. Instead of keeping at range, being a sniper and picking away, just slowly breaking Benoit down as you were, you rushed the process, deviated from the game plan, and it cost you the fight. It put Benoit in started off in that mounted triangle to moving on just into mount and unloading with a ton of unanswered strikes, both punches, elbows, hammer fists. A lot of people online were criticizing Herb Dean for such a poor stoppage. I realized that Dan Hooker shelled up and was trying his best to not wear the damage, but he also wasn't working out of that position. I think that the criticism to Herb Dean is absolutely valid. Herb is a liability at this stage. I can also understand Herb saying that I want to give somebody like a Dan Hooker every last chance to be able to work out of it. But there was a moment where you could see that Dan Hooker, even he was done. When he just shelled up and was eating elbow after elbow, not trying to get to a hip, not trying to bump, not trying to continue to shoulder walk and create some space at the hips. When he stopped doing all of those things and reverted to just shelling up over his face, that's his way of saying without saying, get me out of here. I'm done. And Herb Dean allowed for him to take another 15 to 20 unanswered strikes after that point. Heavy strikes at that. The next fight, man, feature bout. I believe this was one of the more entertaining fights on the card. You saw a bit of a comeback affair in the second round with Mauricio Rufy. I thought that Fiziev was having a lot of positive moments in their matchup up to that point, where then he ends up getting caught. He gets TKO'd by the punches from Rufy. According to the camps, according to Volk himself speaking on Rufy, he said, man, like what this young man had to go through just to get to fight night, you guys would be absolutely amazed. And then for him to go out there and to put on that type of performance against Rafa, spectacular. I think that this proved a lot to us about Rufy. I think that Rufy showed that he really can compete with some of the tops of the division. You know, he's a guy who has a tremendous amount of potential, though I do still believe there's holes to his game and there's ways that you can get to a victory on a Rufy. I think that Fiziev was certainly starting off fairly well in that contest, but obviously that doesn't matter when you're in a game of high stakes, violent human chess, and you have somebody who has sniper like precision, timing, and accuracy the way that a Hoofy does. Yeah, you're seeing the torch in some cases being passed to that next generation of guy at 55. We just talked about it with Hooker to Benoit. This is now Fiziev to Rufy. Two of that quote unquote next wave. There they are. They're saying, I'm here in big moments on a main card, on a massive stage for this Paramount era in the UFC. The next bout, you had Taliesin Teixeira take home a decision victory over Tai Tuivasa. Tai just ran out of gas. You know, Teixeira certainly won 2 rounds, no doubt about it. But he got tired, and Tai just happened to be so tired as well that he made some, you know, I mean, I'll call it IQ mistake decisions, but I think that it was just desperation out of the fatigue level where he was clinching up and trying to grapple in the 3rd round. If Tai would have had any little bit of juice left in the tank, he would have been able to knock out and finish Teixeira. But unfortunately for Tai, that wasn't the case. He dropped his 6th fight in a row. I do believe that that type of performance, though, is enough to be able to keep him around. And, you know, hopefully he gets a little bit of time to heal, get his fight legs back under him. He did spend a little bit of time away trying to get himself back right, trying to find himself back in a position where he really missed the game and had to put out a lot of sacrifice, a lot of discipline just to be able to earn his spot to go make the walk. Maybe we don't see him again. If we didn't, or if we don't, then, you know, we got to see a lot of great performances from Bam Bam. But if we do, I just hope that there's a little bit more IQ. There's a little bit more gas in the tank. There's a little bit more just all of that mix that made him be that guy who was on that crazy knockout streak just a couple of years ago. Give us back a little bit of that magic, especially with as shallow as the heavyweight division is right now. Because, I mean, from where he made the run even a couple of years ago, it was a different lay of the land at heavyweight, right? You had a little bit of a stronger hole at the top of the division. Whereas now, I mean, it's a run for your money for anybody outside of maybe two guys at heavyweight right now at this point. Moving along from that fight, another main card matchup, we're seeing the emergence of, once again, another star on the rise at 155. You have Quillen Salkid. He picks up that rear naked choke victory over Jamie Malarkey. I think that this showed us another wrinkle or another element to Quillen's game. Quillen was Rookie of the Year across many different polls for 2025. This was his first entrance into 2026, and man, it was against a notable name, a guy who's been around the division for quite some time, and Jamie Malarkey has fought some notable names out there, and he gets to add another known, notable, respected, reputable veteran to his resume with yet another finish. That's now 3 of 4 fights that he's finished since being in the UFC. This is a guy who you absolutely have to keep your eyes on in that 155-pound division. Anytime that you're racking up bonuses the way that he is, the promotion is going to start trying to build you. They're going to start giving you some of those matchups where, hey, we think that this is one of those fights where you can go out there and potentially give us one of those star building highlight reel type of outings before you're in the rankings. Because once we get in the rankings, then obviously the ante is a little bit higher, but they're going to keep on probably giving this kid some vets or some guys who are fringe level contenders or fringe level ranked guys that are just going to be name builders. They're going to be name and highlight reel type of builders for him. And he's got a lot of potential, so keep your eyes on Quillen Salkid. The matchup with Billy Elikana and Junior Tafa, we talked about it last week. It's hot dog water. Junior Tafa now 6-5. Elikana, yeah, he moved up to 10-2. He's a big athletic kid. Is he anything that says, I'm a guy? No. Hopefully in time he continues to grow, mature, evolve, and blossom as a fighter at 205, because that's another division that could use some fresh blood as we're starting to see a little bit of a turn of Father Time coming at the top. But again, is he just someone who really says, I'm him? No. Next matchup, you had Cam Roston pick up a victory by TKO in the second round. Next fight beyond that, hey, Perez Finney, said it before, I don't understand how he's gotten this far with the record that he had. He was coming into that fight at 11-0. He's a middleweight who's like 5 foot. I think he's listed at 5'8", but in all reality, he's closer to like 5'5", 5'6". He's about as wide as he is tall. He's jacked. He's super strong. But when he fought against somebody who has some real chops at 185, someone who he can't just basically use strength against, like, people are going to say that, oh yeah, it's his wrestling. Yeah, I mean, you could say that it's his wrestling, but it was more or less some strength and positional control that Finney had in those fights where he picked up some victories toward that latter stage, you know, towards once he was past contender, but once he got into the, just not a lot that said, again, that, oh yeah, I'm a future contender. And Dana himself said that if he continues to fight with that style, he's going to have a lot of problems once he's in the UFC. He didn't get completely sparked. He didn't get obliterated. It did go the distance. But you do see that this is basically it's not exactly Duran win, but it's kind of in that ballpark. Next matchup, you had a crazy back and forth fight between Jonathan Michaeloff and Oban Elliott. The Welsh gangster, hey, he went out there scrapping away, took some damage, ends up getting choked in the process. Tech subbed at that, submitted, put to sleep with that rear naked choke. There's just a couple of guys who are early on in their UFC run in the welterweight division. Man, the future is bright. That's the thing that you have to say for some of the divisions out there, like welterweight. Whereas, again, heavyweights, they are so desperate for anybody to potentially step up and say, "Hey, I'm a little bit of somebody to check out." That's why you see Josh Hokett all over the place making headlines, whether it's the crazy promo interview that he did with Ariel last week to his post-fight shenanigans. Even if they're to the ire of somebody like a Dana White, who said he wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of his in-cage interview, he's drawing eyes to the division and he's winning fights. They are so desperate to have anybody move the needle there in any sort of fashion. Whereas in some of these other divisions, you have a whole wave of new contenders who are knocking on the door, like welterweight. That's a guy like Jonathan. You have a shifting of the tides of some of that hierarchy at 170. That being said, also in the last week, we were broken the news that Shavkat Rakhmonov has had yet another knee injury. Shavkat is that boogeyman that I think is just ultimately in the long run, he's going to be one of those what ifs. What if he didn't get hurt this many times? What if he didn't have this injury? Because that's now going to put him out for over 2 years of activity. And he's had multiple other long layoffs due to having to have surgical corrections. And the last time that we saw him fight, he was a shell of what some of his best performances were. As the age factor grows for him now, as the miles and the damage on his body continue to accrue, I don't know that we'll ever see a peak form of Shavkat again. If we'll ever really see that person who was that menacing boogeyman from 3 years ago, I don't know if that guy will ever exist again. But now there's a whole new crop of guys at 170 who are in the rankings and who are still on the outside looking in, who are saying, "Hey, it's my time now." You, Leon, Kamaru, Bilal, all of you guys, you had your time. Colby, you had your time. We're here now. And I think we're starting to see some of those guys have some breakout performances at a weight class like 170. And then you had a pretty controversial decision in the fight between Riza and Genghis Khan Alfi. Riza certainly had a lot of advantaged scoring positions. I can't remember what verdict scored it, but there was a lot of controversy to this being a majority decision. There was a draw on the scorecards. You could make the case that it was 29-28 either way. You could absolutely also say that there was for sure the 10-8 round. Tough to call. But that wraps up the UFC 325 coverage there from that card down under in Sydney. This weekend, the UFC is back here stateside. They're going to be for their first fight night of the Paramount Plus era. So the first fight night, not a numbered card. And it is also the first fight night in the newly named Meta Apex, formerly known as the UFC Apex. This week's main event is a bantamweight showdown between Mario Bautista taking on Vinicius Oliveira. Vinicius Oliveira, a guy who has had sort of a fast rise in the men's bantamweight division, whereas Mario Bautista, he's been around for a little bit of time. He's fought some of the hierarchy of the division. He's fought guys who have held belts in other weight classes. This is a matchup where, does the explosive volatility of the risks that Oliveira presents overwhelm some of the conservative, conventional, strategic approaches that Mario Bautista brings. Mario Bautista comes from a very well-trained, well-oiled machine, discipline-based camp at the lab down there in Phoenix. We've seen him have the ability to go out there against some of these guys who have blitzing styles and neutralize them. Use the fence, use his grappling, use timely striking to score when the openings are there, and then control the distance, mitigate the damage, and ride the fight out. He's been able to do that before for 15. Can he do that for 25? Can he go out there and have a statement delivering performance against a rising contender with dangerous potential the way that Vinicius Oliveira is? Is this one of those breakout moments on a big stage for Mario Bautista to say, yes, this is my first main event. Yes, I am a valid contender at 135, and I'm here to insert my name into the top ranks of this division and say that, you know, I may not be next, but I'm a fight or two away from a title shot. You've got a co-main event matchup between a couple of top-ranked flyweights in Amir Albazi taking on Kyoji Horiguchi. I think that Horiguchi is just too skilled. Amir Albazi has his strong points. Don't get me wrong, but I do think that he's on the slower end of the division for 125 pounds. On the flip side, I think that Kyoji Horiguchi, pound for pound, is one of the most skilled guys on any roster out there. He had a strong run in the UFC years ago, left in free agency to pursue other opportunities. And that, keep in mind, you know, he left once, I believe, and also I believe his only loss was to Mighty Mouse, just for the record. He left amidst the time where the division was in flux and went out and got paid before there was the chance to be without a place to get paid. Won belts in every other major organization that he fought for, has now made his return to the UFC, looked incredible over in Qatar for his debut, has the support of one of the biggest gyms out there in the fight game, who says that he is pound for pound the most skilled guy in the room. And that's coming from American Top Team, who has as many highly known, notable fighters as you guys well are aware of out there. I think that it's only a matter of time before Horiguchi punches his ticket to getting a title shot. Horiguchi is also one of those guys who is a massive star in a market that the UFC is trying to capture. He's a massive star in Japanese MMA and over in the Asian market in general. The UFC 100% wants to see somebody like him continue to rise through the ranks and have a shot at gold to be able to capitalize on his namesake, his likeness, and his draw. I think in this matchup, think that he's too well-rounded. The only way that Albazi potentially wins is by catching and clipping him, sort of the same way that Sergio Pettis did. That title fight for Bellator, the only reason why Sergio Pettis won that title against Kyoji Horiguchi was because he was losing every second of that fight until that spinning back fist landed. Nothing to be taken away from Pettis because he was in tune and lucid all the way to the moment of finding his opportunity once it presented itself. But that just goes to show that Kyoji really is that guy. Next matchup on the card is a heavyweight bout between Rivsan Kunaev taking on Jailton Almeida. A couple of heavyweights with some considerable experience. I mean, nothing that's to write home to mama about as far as the entertainment factor or value there for that matchup, if we're being completely honest. Almeida has the chance to go on and be a potential contender based off of his ability, but I believe that overall, one of the biggest things that he lacks is he lacks finishing power, or he lacks a true hunger to go out there and finish fights definitively. Has he finished? Sure. But does he have that once I get you to the ground where my best assets are, do I have that I'm going to maul you sort of approach? No, he doesn't. Next matchup comes in the middleweight division. You have a couple of longtime UFC vets in Michael Olajejczyk taking on the power bar Marc-Andre Barriault. I think that we've seen Olajejczyk have some of his better performances over the last couple of years. He's had some mixed bag of results as far as the wins and losses. However, I think that his time that he spent with fighting nerds to the performances of recent, he's got slick boxing and he's continued to add to his game and become more well-rounded in the process. Barriault is a tough dude, but I also believe that he's beatable. You know, if Olajejczyk doesn't allow for Barriault to be a bully, for lack of a better sense, if he doesn't allow Barriault just to control the cage and to work positions, blanket him, tripod up against the fence, make him carry the weight. I think if he avoids those sequences, I think that Michael Olajejczyk could very certainly box away at Marc-Andre Barriault. Couple of matchups to talk about further on the card before we move along. You have also on the main card, John Matsumoto, 17-1, coming in against Farid Basharat at 14-0. Couple of very tough rising prospects in the bantamweight division. I think that this has a potential for fight of the night all over it, just based off of where these two guys are at, both trying to punch their ticket into that hierarchy of what I believe to be the most talent-rich divisions in all of MMA at 135 pounds. Then next matchup, rounding off the main card, you have our friend of the program, our very first in-studio guest once upon a time way back in the day. You have the Hanyak Dustin Jacoby taking on Julius Walker. Dustin was originally supposed to fight on last week's UFC 325 card. Jimmy Crute tore his ACL. Ends up not being on that card, obviously. Gets bumped this week, has the opportunity to fight a young man in Julius Walker. Hey, Julius is a great kid. I've been in the gym with Julius as well. They've spent a little bit of time training with each other, but there's absolutely an experience gap between the two. And I think that this is a good weekend for Dustin to go out there, pick up a big victory, start off 2026 on the right foot, and keep it moving back toward the top rankings of that 205-pound division. Another couple of matchups just to talk about here on the prelims before we keep it moving along. Want to talk about a matchup between Saeed Nurmagomedov and Javid Basharat. That's two guys that on any given night can compete with the thick of anybody at 135 pounds. They both in their last few fights have had some ups and downs as far as the wins and losses go. But again, this is a fight between two very highly talented and skilled bantamweights. Yes, this is the brother of Farid Basharat and Javid Basharat. Kind of cool, I guess, in one sense that they get to share the card as brothers. It's always a mixed bag of emotions whenever you ask fighters, do you like fighting with teammates on the same card or do you want to be by yourself? It's a little bit independent or a little bit different for everybody, but yeah, this is hardly the first time that they have done it, but it's just a big opportunity to do it together on a UFC card. Another matchup to round out this card before we move it along here. You have a matchup between Muin Gafarov taking on Jakob Woodlocks. I think that, again, this is a couple of young guys who are early in their run in the UFC, but very talented at 135 pounds. Jakob is the guy who, in his last matchup, was able to beat Patchy Mix, who, that's another crazy story that most people didn't know that Patchy got released and has moved on to other pastures now at this stage. That kind of flew underneath the radar after he went 0-2 right away in the UFC. But yeah, I think that this is another good matchup to keep your eyes on the undercard there at this week's UFC Fight Night card. Now, going to talk through a couple of the cards, just giving you some matchups on the rundown for this weekend's events that are going down here in Colorado. You have on Saturday, the CJJC 29 annual Grapple Bowl that's going down again at the Stampede. We have weigh-ins that are happening on Friday at the Ugly Dog Sports Cafe. You can certainly come and check those out. Those are open to the public. And then the card going down Saturday at the Stampede. come check it out. We're cracking the doors for those early prelims, and we're going to be in full tilt, full action right at around the noon mark for you there at CJJC 29 Grapple Bowl. Going to talk through just the main card matchups that we have on this card. You have in the main event a 180-pound no-gi matchup between Tyler the Choker Betts. He does have some collegiate wrestling in his back pocket there. He's going to be taking on Artur Bishanov of High Altitude Martial Arts. Artur just so happened to be the best blue belt in the world last year, winning the 2025 World IBJJF No-gi Championship. So that's going to be some contrasting styles that we have in the main event that certainly aims to entertain for the crowd. In the co-main event, you have a matchup between Matteo Colazzo, who also has some collegiate wrestling in his background, who's taken on a very active and frequently competing brown belt on the scene here coming out of New Era Jiu-Jitsu. That's the ace, D'Anthony Muniz. D'Anthony has a real funky style. He really goes out there and takes risks, trying to find finishes in a lot of different creative ways, finding some different and intricate level entanglements to try to go grab a foot or to find a submission entry there. Anybody who comes from Professor Matt Sierra's camp over there at New Era Jiu-Jitsu is always going to be well-versed, well prepared. But I also recognize that this is a matchup that there was a shift a little bit late on in the game as far as the opponent there. So got to give Colazzo credit for stepping up to somebody who does have quite the experience that D'Anthony does. Again, D'Anthony has competed in the CJJC cage before. He's competed in pit-style jiu-jitsu, tournament, stage, platform, all sorts of different venues and formats. So you got to have two to tango. I think that this could potentially be a rather highlight-based finish in this co-main event matchup there. Bring in an additional form of grappling into the cage for this weekend's event. We have a 165-pound wrestling match that is going to be going down with our custom wrestling rule set. That is going to be 3 rounds. First round is going to be 3 minutes. The next round's 2 minutes. You have Anthony the Rubber Band Man Bendy, who is taking on CJ Chavez of Genesis. Anthony Bendy has competed across multiple different formats for us at CJJC, whether it is our traditional pro shows to our grapple games formats, bringing it just to the wrestling game. I'm interested to see how both of these guys go out there and have the chance to go and figure out who can handle themselves best within our specific rule set. We'll talk more about what that entails directly on that CJJC 29 Grapple Bowl pre-show that you can check out on the CJJC YouTube on Saturday. Next matchup on the card, we have a women's matchup in the no-gi realm. This is going to be between Laura Kocher of Flow State Jiu-Jitsu, who has taken on Aylin Fletcher of Onyx Jiu-Jitsu. Both very well-respected camps out there in the grappling world here on the Colorado scene. I think that right now there's been a lot of momentum with Onyx competitors. Sometimes that translates into performances. Sometimes it doesn't. You know, it's obviously it's a very ebb and flow, individual-based sport. But I think that they have also came out and put themselves in a position to where there's a certain level of established quality, if you will, or efficacy within the disciplines and the skill sets when we're talking people who are coming from some of these camps. And I just look for this to be a great battle of skill between two high-ranked grapplers out there to kick off that second matchup on the main card there. Or excuse me, that's third matchup on the main card. Next one, we have a 165-pound gi matchup. So that's 3 different forms of grappling that you're going to see on the main card alone. You have a gi matchup between Kyle the Cobra Kirk out of Says MMA down in Colorado Springs. He's under the tutelage of Professor Mike Sesnalevich. Mike has a long history in combat sports, dates back to the Militich fight systems, was the first heavyweight in the UFC to pull off a UFC once upon a time way back when. So a lot of lineage, a lot of history there with his camp. He's taken on Travis T-Bone Henderson of Brazilian Top Team up there in Evergreen. Both veterans of the CJJC cage. Both guys who I expect to have a really interesting chess matchup in the funky pajamas. It's a different game when they have the gi on. It starts to slow down a little bit. There's more grips. There's more friction with the material. And I'm interested to see how this plays out between these two guys. And then open up that main card. You have a 175-pound no-gi matchup between Zeke Alirez taking on Talamai Scott. Scott's independent. Alirez representing DCO MMA. This is the first time back in competition for a little while that we've seen Zeke. He's had to deal with some injuries and getting himself back right to be in the ballpark of starting to get back into fighting and competition shape, so on and so forth. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what form of him we get in the cage. He's a guy who has a tremendous amount of experience within the combat sports world, lots of fights, to him being in just a fight family, the Alirez family. You know their history. If you're in the fight community, you have cousins that have done things on a high level on the national scene of wrestling, so on and so forth. So I think that we have the potential of seeing somebody who is one of those next guys, if you will, when we're always talking about who are the potential prospects coming out of the scene. Well, this is somebody who has garnered some of that attention through time. And unfortunately, hey, injuries happen. And sometimes that deviates the path, but what is delayed isn't always denied. That rounds off that main card there. We have plenty of other matchups. We talked about some more of this on the CJJC 29 annual Grapple Bowl card. That is on the breakout show on the CJJC YouTube channel. You could check that out. And then running down real quick, we have Colorado Combat Club 28 going down at the Stampede. Once again, that is on Sunday. Doors are cracking at 12 p.m. We'll get you out of there by the time that the big game starts. In the main event, you have a matchup between a couple of very well-known veterans out here on the local scene. Another guy we just talked about says MMA. Well, we have another one coming from Says. That's Darian Robinson, who has taken on Justin J-Train Gonzalez. J-Train, a friend of the program here at the MMA Plug. J-Train now floats around and does some training across a few different camps here on the northern Colorado front. A lot of roots with Azteca Boxing up there in Greeley, in addition to, like I say, a lot of the scene around here in Colorado where he's bounced around trying to get some of the best looks out there. Justin had a very tough fight in his last outing against Edwin Chavez. He's looking to go back and get his hand raised, start getting back in the right direction and trying to get back up to one of those big shows, a veteran of both Bellator as well as the PFL. Darian Robinson, a veteran of shows like Fury, has competed against some high-level names out there within the local scene, fought Yusuf Zalal on the King of Sparta kickboxing round as far as the tournament goes. So again, both guys who have fought some names out there, both going to be tough, both going to be looking to go out there and have a statement performance in that main event on Sunday. In the co-main event, you have a matchup between Connor Leonard. Connor Leonard, one half of the fight of the year last year in Colorado, as that matchup at Colorado Combat Club 26 against Brandon Waters was one of the greatest fights in Colorado MMA history. He's taken on a last-second, late-minute replacement in Rob Fuller. He was originally scheduled to face Hussam El Khazri. Hussam unfortunately sustained an injury and was no longer able to compete. So in steps Fuller on short notice. Connor is a kid who I just think this is one of those guys you have to keep your eyes on. He's got the right mix of physical skill set along with mental attributes and understands it. He understands how to promote himself. He understands that he needs to go out and have some exciting performances and finishes to be able to get himself to where he ultimately wants to be. And I think that Sunday is just another step in that direction for a kid like Connor Leonard, who has just a tremendously bright future out there. The next matchup, you have Chitwood taking on Miguel Barrientos. Miguel Barrientos, friend of the program. He's a fighter who he goes for it every single time that he makes the walk. I think that this is a matchup where you could very well see Miguel go out there and have another first-round finish like he had in his last matchup. I think that Miguel is one of those kids who, where he ultimately ends up is going to be based off of timing, matchup opportunities, so on and so forth. But he also has some things that you can't replace. You can't replace the type of heart and the grit that kid has and the willingness to just go to war, to go for the victory. Next fight, you have a lightweight title fight between Jordan Miles taking on Tyree Wolfork. This is a big size difference between these two guys. Wolfork is a longer based fighter, but his last fight was at 35. He's now challenging Jordan Miles, who is like a 6'2", 6'3" lightweight. It's going to be a pretty significant size advantage once it comes time to actually get in there locked in the cage for Jordan Miles. Wolfork has a plethora of experience, but Jordan also has a lot of experience in his own right and was able to go out there and win against a tough opponent in the title eliminator fight that we had in December. It's going to be a fight where I think you're going to see fireworks one way or the other. The next matchup, you have Jolial taking on Quadra Husseini, a couple of guys who are younger earlier on in their journey, but are definitely going to go out there and going to try to impose their will on each other. Quadra Husseini is a kid who's never seen a boring fight so far in his run. Next matchup, you have a couple of heavyweights in Lopez against Kozik. Nurm has been away for a couple of years, but Big Nurm is, hey, he's big Bosnian bomber with 6'5", 250 pounds of natural size. That's hard to deal with no matter what you say when you're that big and you're that athletic. You have a matchup between Vic Rangel and Hamdard. That's in the elimination flyweight ranks. I think that Rangel is one of those kids who he's got a real bright future out there. One of those main training partners for Conor Leonard. I've had the chance to see him work in the gym a little bit. It's going to be a kid who I think you certainly should keep your eyes on as well here on the Colorado scene. Then you have Henry and Gao taking on a welterweight elimination ranks matchup. And rounding off the card, you have Jeff Auer taking on Fogelberg. This is going to be a couple of big boys getting after it. I've seen Auer many a times in the grappling world competing for us for CJJC. It's going to be fun to see him transition things and up the ante going on with a full MMA fight. Again, that's going down this Sunday, the 8th at the Stampede. Doors are opening up at 12 p.m. And now moving along to our message of the week. For a lot of you listening, there's a time to be humble and respectful, and there's a time to show out and see whose dick's bigger. It's fight time for a lot of you guys. Go out there and impress yourself, have some fun, and don't leave it up to chance. Don't be the what if. Go show up, go show out, have fun, impress yourself, and leave nothing up to chance. And now to wrap things up for the week, we're going to move along to 3 rounds. Got my man Danny Bailey behind the boards. First round, my man, what do we have?
All right, Jordan. Joe Rogan says Tank Abbott would still F a lot of people up in the lower ranks of the heavyweight division today. Do you agree?
Absolutely. The heavyweight division is as shallow qualitatively as it's arguably ever been. Hammered that horse, that dead horse at that. It's to a bloody pulp at this point many a times. Somebody like Tank Abbott, who was a big, massive human who threw everything but the kitchen sink into his punches with bad intentions and wanting to just hurt you as a brawler, that live by the sword, die by the sword approach would still do very well in today's heavyweight division, especially against the lower half of the roster. As long as Tank wasn't fresh off of a bar stool and days deep into a bender the way that he was at times throughout his MMA career, he could still, at minimum, be a 50-50 guy with the lower portion of the division, if not better. I mean, I could definitely say that if you were to give me the best version of Tank, well, which guys can he beat in the rankings? There's definitely a few names that he could go out there and still beat if you were to compare those two from when you saw the better part of Tank to some of those guys. Yeah, I think that he would still win fights for sure.
Alexander Volkanovski tied Josie Aldo's record for featherweight title defenses. Has Volk become the featherweight GOAT?
Yes. I think that the diversity of wins that he's had, even though he's had some rematches, but in those rematches, well, one of them was the trilogy with Max Holloway. When you would say, who are your Mount Rushmore people for the division? Well, it's Volk, it's Aldo, it's Max, and then you probably throw Conor in as that next guy. Even though, the no defenses, the blah, blah, blah. It's just based off of the history and what the lineage is of the belt.
Sorry, I got my window here a little mixed up, but let me get back to third round. Dana White gave his Mount Rushmore of boxing by saying, Muhammad Ali is my number 1. Number 2 is Sugar Ray Robinson. Number 3 is Floyd Mayweather. And my number 4 is Mike Tyson. What are your thoughts?
When Dana's saying this, you also have to understand that he's coming from a promoter's perspective while accounting for the business end of the game. And when you factor all of those things in, it's almost a perfect list. When we're looking at his number 1, well, I feel like Muhammad Ali is probably going to be at the top of the majority of people's lists out there. And if you're just saying a Mount Rushmore period, even if he's not your number 1, there's no way that Ali is not on your Mount Rushmore. I think that's undisputable. You can't go out there and debate that point. Then you throw in Sugar Ray Robinson, who is widely regarded as the greatest champion ever based off of merits, record, title defenses, and skill. Would you say that he's pound for pound the best skilled guy of all time? Hard to argue against that. You know, I don't have as much viewing experience with him, but obviously based off of era as compared to maybe some others. But I do understand and respect what he brings to the table as far as his resume. Hard to argue against that one. And then when you talk about Floyd Mayweather is arguably the greatest defensive boxer that we have ever seen. And in terms of a guy who knew or understood the business and became a massive promoter on his own that broke the mold, and then also with Dana made a lot of money with that money fight with Conor McGregor, being able to shift the narrative or break the mold and change the game in so many ways as a fighter / promoter, 100% understandable why you have Floyd Mayweather on your list. And then rounding it off with Mike Tyson, has there ever been, aside from maybe Ali, has there ever been a more culturally, like a mass mainstream, totally transcendent level star the way that Mike Tyson has been? Even despite all of the bad, all of the controversy, all of the legal issues, the substance issues, the reformation, the coming back to light, the recovery, the him now being once again one of the biggest stars, most recognized people on planet Earth. Has there been anybody besides arguably maybe Ali who is a more culturally impactful boxer that there's ever been? I'm not saying the best guy in terms of what he did in the ring or best fighter, but in terms of what is their impact from a culture, from a business, from all of those things. Has there been anybody bigger? Has there been anybody who is more notable? I'm open to hearing the argument, but the only name that I'll really accept that's a bigger star from the boxing world than Mike Tyson is Muhammad Ali. That wraps it up for us, though, this week here at the MMA Plug. Want to say thank you all so much for joining us along and supporting us here. As always, your support allows us to be able to continue to do what we do here. If you have the opportunity, please check out our shows this weekend going down at the Stampede. That is CJJC 29 Annual Grapple Bowl show happening again at the Stampede, cracking the doors around noon. You'll be able to check out the action all afternoon there. The next day, on Sunday, we have Colorado Combat Club 28. That is going to be doors cracking at noon. First fight's roughly around 1. We'll have you out of there up on time for the big game to be going down. We greatly appreciate you there. We have Dustin Jacoby here from the Denver area that's going to be fighting on that on that Paramount Plus Fight Night card, the first one of its era. Got Danny Bailey behind the boards. Thank you as always, my man. Smash that like, share, and subscribe on all of these Mile High Sports platforms. I'm Jordan Kurtz. Give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery on Instagram and on Threads, or check me out on TikTok at the Peanut Gallery MMA. This is the MMA Plug on Mile High Sports.